Hello, Magic players and collectors. Welcome to the Land Library. I'm your librarian, and in this episode of Legacy Logbook, I'll be covering the basics. The basic lands, that is. Basic lands have been the backbone of the game since the very beginning, having been introduced in Alpha along with the concept of lands at all. Lands generating mana is a core mechanic of Magic, and the basic lands are easily the most consistent and reliable mana source. The basic lands are so integral to this mechanic that they even have their own rule in deck building where they have no limit on how many you can put in a deck. But as big of a part of the game as they are, they're often taken for granted and kind of overlooked. Like, players will put them in things but not really pay attention to them. And I'm here to change that and give some light to the storied past of the basic lands. Like previously mentioned, the basic lands, and lands as a concept, have been around since Alpha. Alpha first introduced two different arts for each of the five basics, and established forest, mountain, swamp, islands, and plains as the core land types. Then, in Beta, there was one more art added for each of them. That was pretty much the only change, but that makes sense since Alpha and Beta are considered like the same set, just different prints. But something else does change soon. In Revised, the text was changed. Cards, including the basic lands, no longer had tap written out in the text and was replaced with a tap symbol. But this symbol was pretty short-lived, when only in 4th edition it was replaced by a different tap symbol, this one being a card with an arrow rather than the tilted T. Although the changes in those first couple years were pretty minor, later in 1995, the same year as 4th edition, the set Ice Age added two fairly big things, one of which was completely new art. When Beta added new art, it didn't replace anything, it just added one more to it, but in Ice Age, it completely replaced all of the art with its own art, a full set of 3 for all of the lands. And the second big thing was it added snow-covered lands. Snow-covered lands functioned identically to the regular ones, like they just made regular mana, but there were other cards that could interact with them a bit more. After Ice Age, the art went back to the 3 original arts in sets until Mirage in 1996. Although there was a set of promos with new art right before Mirage, those weren't in a set, so it is kind of a different thing. But Mirage set the precedent, where every set after it had its own art for the basics, and it never returned to the original arts other than occasional special prints that call back to them, like the 30th anniversary edition. Then, in 1997, with the set Portal, the text was completely removed from the basic lands for the first time, and replaced with the mana symbols. But it would switch between having text or not having text for the next few sets, all the way up until Mercadian Mosques in 1999, when the text was removed and stayed removed in every set after. Backing up a little though, in 1998 there was a silly little set called Unglued. This was the first of the unsets, and this set brought a lot of goofiness to Magic, but it also brought one of the most groundbreaking concepts: full art lands. These first full art lands were gorgeous, and were for a long time the only full art lands, more of a novelty of the silly set than a normal part of new sets like it is today. The novelty was later continued in other unsets until it eventually made its way into regular sets too. Now here's one of the most important things to happen to basic lands in the entire history of basic lands. In 2003, in the set 8th edition, basic lands were made into a basic lands. Despite being referred to as basic lands before 8th edition, they were actually just regular lands, but they didn't have like a deck limit because of how simple they were. The 8th edition revised a lot of rules and simplified a lot of things, and it added basic as a super type that gave land the inherent properties of being a basic. A revolutionary, I know, but this little change united the basic lands and led way for other changes to be possible. All the previous lands that had functioned as basic lands had their errata changed to be officially basic lands, including the snow-covered lands. And on the topic of snow-covered lands, the next big shakeup came in 2006's Cold Snap, when snow-covered lands were revisited. This time around, though, they were a little different. With the addition of supertypes, snow lands became their own supertype. Actually, snow itself was the supertype in general, being added to creatures, enchantments, and land, but we're here for lands. The new supertype can coexist with other supertypes like basic or legendary, so there was now basic snowlands that work as both basics and snow. Snowlands worked a little different from the snow-covered lands, or not so much different as just like they have more properties. And as such, the original snow-covered lands had their errata changed to be included as basic snowlands. And now I should probably explain what snowlands do. Snowlands make snow mana is what I'd like to say, but snow mana doesn't work like that. Snow mana is a cost, not a color, in the same sense that a generic mana cost is not the same as a colorless mana. A card can require a snow mana, but that just means that it must be fulfilled by a snow source, regardless of the color of the source, just like a generic can be from any source. Another interesting quirk of basic snowlands is that despite still being basics, they aren't actually allowed as external basics in drafting. That is to say that while you're drafting, you're allowed to add basic lands you did not pull in packs to your deck to make it functional, but snow basic lands are not allowed unless you actually do pull them in packs. A bit of a smaller first was in 2009 in Zendikar. I alluded to this earlier, but this was the first set that had full art basics in a regular set. Not so much like a new concept, just it being used more widely, but I thought it was still worth bringing up. The next major change after the Snowlands came in 2016, a whole decade later, when the set Oath of the Gatewatch dropped a bombshell, a sixth basic land. This one was Wastes. This is the basic land for colorless, and being way after full arts were common, started off immediately having some full arts. Interestingly, Wastes works the same but not the same as other basics. As a basic, it gets the inherent abilities of a basic, so it taps for one of its color, in this case, no color, and has no deck building limit, but unlike the other basics, Wastes has no subtype. Without a subtype, it can't be targeted in the same way as the others, like it doesn't have any of its own fetch lands or anything, but it can still be targeted by anything that targets basics as a whole. Wastes also doesn't affect domain and shares the basic Snowland quirk of having to be pulled in packs to be used in a drafted deck. The addition of Wastes was the last major change to basic lands, except of course for snow-covered Wastes, which wasn't printed until Modern Horizon 3 in 2024. As of making this video, that was only a couple months ago. If I had made this video earlier, that wouldn't have even been a thing. Wastes really would have just been where it ended. And that's 8 years after Wastes was added. I don't know why it took them 8 years to make snow-covered Wastes, since snowlands have been around since like 1995. And that's it for the history of basic lands, currently at least. If there's a big change again in the future, I might redo this video to include it, but for now, that's where the timeline ends. That's not where the video ends, I still have things to talk about, but that's where the timeline part ends. There's a lot of interesting things that didn't really fit in the timeline, so I'm gonna go over some, I guess, kind of trivia now, such as the 5 core basic lands straight up have never been printed in a set with the modern tap symbol. They went textless before it started to be used in 8th edition, and although they do each have one print with the tap symbol on it from Secret Lair, these weren't in a set. These are really fun though, I like these a lot. They're cleverly called the full text lands as opposed to full art lands. And outside of that, only Wastes have ever been printed with the tap symbol in a set. Another fun little fact, when they were first trying to translate the game into other languages, The German version had a misprint on one of the forests where it had a plains art. And I can't talk about Basic Lands without mentioning Barry's Land. Barry's Land was a playtest card for Invasion in 2000 that was a colorless land with the ability that when it was on the field, it counted as a basic. Its concept was purely for the sake of expanding domain, but at the time it was deemed to not really be functional because it would have to be a basic and a non-basic at the same time. Later, with the addition of the basic super type, it fixed that problem, which eventually led to wastes being a thing, even though wastes doesn't affect domain, so it's not quite the same thing. But backing up to Barry's Land again, the art that had originally been, ordered for Barry's Land was repurposed for Reliquary Tower, which is pretty neat. And then, with its eventual release as a test card in Mystery Booster in 2019, it has the unique subtype of Cloud. This card is not legal in any format because it's a playtest card, and it doesn't really have its original proposed properties of, changing between basic and non-basic, but it's still a fun callback. And since I've brought up Domain a couple times, I should probably explain what it actually is. Domain is a keyword that gains magnitude based on how many basic land types you control. These do not have to come from the basic lands themselves, so dual lands like the shock lands or true duals, or other lands like the triomes that just have basic land types will be counted towards domain. My last little bit of trivia is that Cave was once considered to be a potential new basic land type. It was beaten out by Wastes, but Cave was eventually used as a general land subtype added in Lost Caverns of Ixalan in 2023. There were a bunch of previous Cave cards, but none of them had their errata updated to have the subtype. I think they should have, but it's not really my call to make. And that's it for the kind of trivia part of this video, but I still wanted to show off a bit of a gallery of some really nice arts, since a lot of the art I showed in this video was pretty old, not all of it, but a lot of it. I wanted to show off a few other, modern arts of basic lands, some of my favorites, some that just look really cool. I picked 3 of each for regular arts and full arts for each of the 5 basic types. I showed pretty much all of the wastes, so I didn't really think they needed their own part in the gallery. And then here at the end of the gallery, I've got a few sets of basic lands that look super nice. These cosmic ones, and then there's this set of pixel art lands. These look so good. And then we have probably the coolest basics in all of Magic, the Phyrexian full art basics. These are awesome. I love them. They're so cool. And that about wraps up everything on basic lands. If you've made it this far in the video, drop a like for turn and subscribe for more land-filled content. If I missed anything or got anything wrong, go ahead and tell me in the comments, and I'll see you next time in Legacy Logbook Dual Colored Lands.